The sound of someone upset, not with sadness but with annoyance, woke me awake. My son remarked, sardonically and casually, as if discussing a stranger on the news, "We're not even her real kids. Why should we look after her?" My daughter's voice sounded like ice when I heard it. "All I can hope for is that she doesn't make it. It would be simpler. In any case, the estate is nearly ready." The words cut like glass through the haze of morphine. I was immobile, unable to talk. Sand was all over my arms. My chest was twisted with tubes. The machines beeped steadily and slowly somewhere behind me. The sound of an uncertain existence that I did not wish to return. At the foot of the bed, they stood. I was far from ever viewing me as their mother, yet I could feel it close enough to touch me. He went on to say, "She didn't even legally adopt us. She recently wed her father. We don't owe her anything because of it." The nurse cleared her throat. "Perhaps you ought to get out. This isn't the location." With their heels clacking, my daughter murmured, "Whatever," and they left. Presuming I was still unconscious and that I hadn't just heard the people I'd reared since they were infants jokingly wish me away, I gazed at the ceiling tiles. I also thought back to the previous Thanksgiving. I had prepared their favorite meals. He even rose at 5 in the morning to make that damned pecan pie he always claimed to enjoy. She never appeared. He complained about traffic and arrived late and departed early. However, this was unique. This was lucidity. It had been an unexpected accident, or at least that's what I thought up until now. While navigating a downward bend, the brakes failed. Just metal and glass, followed by black, with no rain or oil slick. And now I was connected up like a test subject, listening to the two people I cared about the most discuss me as if I were a burden. They were eager to bury us also. I felt like screaming. Asking them who taught them how to tie their shoes made me want to sit up and question them. On the night of their father's death, who held them? After their mother left, who managed to gather enough love to restore their sense of wholeness? However, I didn't. Now that I realized they weren't mine, I lay still. Not in the important ways. I didn't think it would make a difference when I was old and damaged and lying in a hospital bed with no one else to speak for me. Although they were my children just when it was convenient, they were my late husband's biological offspring. Mine when they needed a shoulder to weep on, a ride, or meal. Not when I was the one in need, and not today. And something inside of me exploded. Not dramatically, not loudly, but with the silent, ruthless finality of an internal locking door. They believed I was going to die. Excellent. Let them think that. Because the woman they believed they could control, exploit, and get rid of was no longer there. Additionally, the person who woke up in her place had lost interest in playing. There were goodnight lullabies and sticky fingers gripping mine, in grocery store aisles before the IVs, before the hospital gown, before their eyes drifted over as if I had already left. There was giggling. They used to refer to me as Mama. There used to be a lot of noise in my house, a comfortable, chaotic mess. Backpacks left in the corridor, breakfast boxes left open, and shoes left at the entrance as if someone else would take care of everything. And someone did. Yes, I did. Being a mother wasn't always my goal. I was in my late 30s when I met Richard. I had already given up on the idea of starting my own family. However, he brought 2 children, a girl and a boy, both under 5, who were mute and shell-shocked when their biological mother disappeared to live abroad. Their small hands wrapped around my scarf that first winter, and their muttered "mama" when nightmares started were all that legally bound me. There were no signatures or judges' stamps. That was all that was required. Despite his weariness, Richard had been nice. He put in a lot of effort and let me do the most of the parenting. He never put any pressure on me to legally adopt them. "It's simply paperwork," he once remarked. They are aware of their lovers. Perhaps it was where the deception started. Looking back, I see how invisible I became in my own house, believing that love was sufficient, like steam leaking through, a fissure slowly and gently. I was folding their clothing and reading bedtime tales at the same time. At supper the next day, I was a shadow that they hardly acknowledged. I became smaller as they grew older. It had been 6 years since his death, carcinoma of the pancreas, quick and harsh. The hedge clippers were still in his hands when I discovered him slumped in the garden. By then, they were attending college, albeit infrequently. Too busy all the time. They held on to me like they would never let go during the burial. I don't think I ever felt like I belonged to them again after that. It was all sluggish withdrawal after that. Text messages replaced phone calls. Silence fell over the texts. They visited during the holidays. They occasionally inquired more about the will than my health. Until they believed I could no longer hear them, they were always courteous and cheerful. I can't get my kid to stop standing at the foot of that hospital bed with his arms folded like a lawyer assessing the benefits and drawbacks of a deal. There was no sign of worry in his gaze. She is not our biological mother. Do you know what I learned from that? Like wolves at a gate, they were only waiting. I also believed that we were still a family all these time, that I could have been overly sensitive, that their separation was not estrangement but just adulthood. Now I can see it plainly. They appreciated the structure I provided, the food I prepared, and the house I created, but they didn't love me the way I loved them. Truth like that weighs heavily. It sinks without screaming, yet it also releases. Because responsibility most definitely won't link me to them if love didn't bind them to me. Let them discuss estates. Allow them to discuss death certificates and timeframes in whispers. They believe they have already triumphed. They are unaware that 2 months ago I changed the conclusion. They are unaware that the house they are waiting for is no longer theirs. And they have no idea who is going to demonstrate to them what a forgotten woman can do with just time, a pen, and the determination to live. Though I was unable to move much, my thoughts remained focused. They ran around the table with peanut butter on their faces, and I was back in the kitchen with a paper plate after one quick glance at the ceiling tile. They were really little. Then, as if she were attempting to blend in with me, my child would snuggle up in my lap. "Don't leave yet," my kid would plead, concealing his face in my coat. And I didn't. The cruelest aspect was that, how completely I remained, even after their mother departed without packing a single suitcase. Even when Richard began to get home later and later. "They're yours now too," and gave me receipts for school outfits I had never requested. I didn't flinch. I got to work. I endured the adolescent silence, the tantrums, and the passive-aggressive meals. Braces and breakups, birthday candles and report cards, missing teeth, scratched knees, and pointless parent-teacher conferences when I sat grinning and they called me stepmother, and I simply nodded as if it didn't hurt were all things I endured. They were unaware that I had sobbed in the washing room, that I would clutch their little socks and ponder how love could simultaneously make you feel so full and inconspicuous. However, I was now merely a lady occupying a hospital bed. The NT, last time any of them uttered, "I love you," is still fresh in my mind. Tossed over a shoulder like spare coin, it was in passing. For weeks I clung to it as if it were important. However, in retrospect, it was only a habit, similar to saying, "Bless you," after sneezing or brushing your teeth. Following the death of their father, they ceased making frequent phone calls. I thought it was sadness. It wasn't. They had received what they had come for: his last name, his wealth, and the family image. After that, what was I? The woman who knew the location of the tax files was a placeholder, a reminder. A year ago, I gave up attempting to get in touch to see what would happen. Nothing took place. No "thinking of you, mama," no birthdays, nothing at all like "did you eat today?" I received the message. So I began to recall. It was the tale that really happened, not the one I told myself. The icy looks. When I replied no, my kid would roll her eyes. How, after I inquired about his financial situation, my son began locking drawers in the workplace. I recalled how, after offering to help her pay off her automobile in December, I overheard them conversing. Assuming I was asleep upstairs, she murmured to him, "She's loaded. She only intends to manipulate us with it." Kindness was presented as a trap by them. They gave the impression that I was dangerous. Nevertheless, I prepared them a pecan pie because I believed that they would return if I continued to love them. Love, however, is not a boomerang. You do not discard it and then wait for it to reappear. Sometimes it is disregarded and merely falls into the earth. into the earth. Then I found myself in a sterile bed with machinery blaring in place of people, by themselves. However, I wasn't entirely alone. Now something else was there. Nor fury nor bitterness, but anger. Something tighter, something quieter. A kind of clean resolve that settles in when you realize no one's coming to save you. And maybe, just maybe, you're the only one who ever truly did. They may have forgotten who I was, but I hadn't. And I still had time. 2 months ago, I sat in a beige leather chair across from a man named Russell Kim. He was younger than I expected, maybe 40, polished, with sleeves too crisp for someone who works with grief all day. Most people don't change their wills unless something big happens, he said, tapping his pen. Something had happened. It wasn't dramatic, just a sound that shouldn't have hurt. Laughter. I'd been walking down the hallway carrying a basket of folded towels to my daughter's old room. They were visiting for the weekend. I overheard them in the living room. My son laughing, full-bellied, and careless, saying, "Just give it a couple more years. She'll croak and we'll split the house." Then she snorted, and added, "Bet she leaves it to a cat or some local library out of spite." And they laughed again, like children giggling behind a locked door. That was the moment I knew. The story I'd built in my head didn't match the one they were telling about me. So I went to Russell. I didn't cry. I didn't explain. I just handed over the old documents. Will, deed, policy. Then I opened my purse and took out a single photograph. It was of me and April, my goddaughter, from the year her mother passed. I took her in for 6 months while her father tried to stay clean. She was 6 at the time, sticky fingers, wide eyes, always calling me her backup mama. She's 32 now, married. Works for the women's shelter 3 blocks from my old church. Sends me letters on real paper, the kind that smell faintly like citrus. Always signs them. Still your girl. Love, April. Russell glanced at the photo. "You want her listed?" "No," I said. "I want her to get everything." He looked up slowly. "Everything?" "Everything. The house, the stocks, the life insurance, even the pearl earrings I've worn only twice but kept in a velvet pouch like a promise." I'd made peace with it in that moment. Love may not have a bloodline, but cruelty has a pattern, and I wasn't going to leave my life's work to people who watched me limp and still reached for the vault. Russell didn't ask questions. He just started typing. By the time I left, the new documents were signed, sealed, and stored. The originals shredded. My instructions were airtight. Not a dime to either child and an automatic transfer to the local shelter if April couldn't be located within 30 days of my passing. "You sure they won't contest?" I asked. He gave a slow smile. "Only if they enjoy wasting money losing." Good, I thought. Let them try. I never told them about the meeting. Let them believe what they wanted. Let them eye the furniture, estimate the land value, whisper to each other about when the paperwork would be settled. Let them laugh, because now I was smiling too. The kind of smile that doesn't come from spite, but from having nothing left. To lose and everything left to protect. I didn't need them to love me anymore. I just needed them to know they didn't break me. Grace had lived across the street since before the kids were tall enough to reach the doorknob. She wasn't nosy, just watchful. The kind of neighbor who noticed a package left too long on the eye. Porch or a porch light that stayed off 3 nights in a row. She was the first person I told after Richard passed away. I remember her standing in my kitchen with a grocery bag full of lemons and ginger, her voice quiet as a hymn. "They'll look to you now," she said, nodding toward the hallway where both children were holed up in their rooms. "But you have to look after yourself too." Back then, I thought she meant grief. I didn't realize she saw the whole thing unraveling long before I did. It was Grace who started paying attention to my son's sudden interest in mail. He'd swing by on weekends, always with some excuse, just checking on the furnace or making sure you locked the back gate. But he never lingered. He'd go straight to the mail slot, pull everything out, flip through it like a scavenger scanning for a prize. Grace saw it all from her front window. Said he didn't even look up once to wave. "He doesn't act like a son," she said over tea one afternoon. "He acts like an auditor." I laughed. It sounded bitter. Maybe he's both. Then came the day he asked me about the deed. Just casually, over coffee. "Hey, do you still have that paperwork from when Dad put the house in your name? I can help you organize stuff if you want, simplify things." He said it with a smile. That too-practiced one he got from Richard. The one that looked like charm to strangers, but always meant agenda to me. I told him I'd think about it. He left 5 minutes later. That evening, Grace texted me. "Saw him circling your mailbox again after he left. Took a photo just in case. Want me to keep watch?" I didn't answer at first, but I left the porch light on for her that night. Like we used to do during storms when the kids were little and afraid of thunder. She took it as a yes. After that, she started documenting everything. His car showing up without warning. The doorbell cam footage from her Ring system. Every moment he stood at my fence but didn't knock. She called it just in case, but we both knew. Then my daughter showed up one afternoon while I was out back trimming the roses. She didn't even come through the gate. Jess leaned over the fence, all soft smiles and breezy concern. "Hey, I was just wondering if you ever need help with the mortgage stuff. Like, if it gets overwhelming, I'm happy to take it off your hands." I blinked. "I own the house outright." "Oh, right, I forgot. But still, Dad always said I was the organized one." That wasn't what Richard used to say, not even close. She left with a hug that didn't linger. The next day, Grace called. She came by too, stayed in the car for 20 minutes before walking up. "Thought you should know. I'll write it down." That was when it hit me. I hadn't told Grace what I'd overheard in the hospital. I hadn't told her I'd changed the will. I hadn't told her I was quietly slipping out from under all of it. But she knew. She saw what I didn't want to see. That the children I raised weren't here to help. They were circling, and she had decided without asking to be my witness. I never asked her to. But in that moment, I knew one thing. They weren't going to get away with it. Not this time. The nurses thought I was sleeping. I was good at that now, still, silent, careful not to react when people said things they shouldn't have near someone, with a pulse. It had been 2 weeks since the crash. They kept using the word accident, a deer maybe, or slick roads, a worn brake pad. These were the excuses, clean and tidy. But I remember the sound, not of impact, of absence. There was nothing when I pressed the brake. Nothing but the hollow clang of metal, the silence of resistance refusing to arrive. I knew that feeling. I knew something was wrong. But grief makes you doubt your own instincts until you start putting the pieces together. I started with the memory of my son holding my keys last month. That smug, casual, "I'll go check the tire pressure for you, Mom." He didn't ask. Just took them and walked out to the driveway like he owned every piece of my life. I barely thought of it at the time. That's how good they were. Good at making every intrusion seem helpful. Then my daughter, she borrowed my car the week before, said hers was low on gas, brought mine back with the mirrors out of place, and the seat pushed so far forward I could barely climb in. I thought it was inconsiderate. Now I knew better. There had been a soft click when I drove that morning. Nothing loud, just enough to raise the hairs on the back of my neck. The kind of detail you forget until you're lying in, a hospital bed with nothing but time and a long list of new questions. So I did what I always do. I observed. When they visited the first time after the crash, they didn't ask about the car, not once. No, what happened, or was anyone else involved? Just one question. So what happens if you can't live alone anymore? That's when I knew. They weren't scared I'd pass away. They were scared I'd linger. I stayed still, watching the nurses come and go. One of them, Clara, was gentle, the kind that moves slow on purpose, the kind that notices when someone's pretending. She took my vitals one afternoon and paused at the foot of my bed. "You're aware, aren't you?" she said softly. I didn't blink, just the smallest nod. Clara leaned closer. "Then maybe it's time to let someone else be aware, too." That night, I tapped 3 fingers against her palm. It was all I could do. Her eyes widened just a little. The next morning, a man showed up without a clipboard or a stethoscope. He wasn't wearing scrubs, just a navy windbreaker and quiet shoes. He stood by the window, hands in his pockets. Clara came in, said only one word. Visitor. He looked at me. Name's Elliot, he said. You hired me once during your divorce, you remember? I blinked again, slowly. He took that as yes. Clara said, You can't talk yet. That's okay. I'm good at reading silence. Opened a folder, slipped in a photo of my car on the tow lot, zoomed in on the brake line. Something was cut, he said. Clean, straight. Someone wanted it to look old, but it's not. This was recent. This was deliberate. I felt it. Then. Not fear, relief, because now it wasn't a suspicion. It was a fact. It was a fact. He glanced around the room, then leaned close. I've already pulled security footage from the hospital and your street cameras. Got a contact in traffic surveillance. We'll find who did this. You just get stronger. And then he smiled. The kind of smile you give someone who's not supposed to be awake but is. Hell of a family you've got, he muttered. No, not family. Not anymore. My fingers barely worked, but Clara understood them better than anyone. We developed a language, without ever writing it down. 3 taps meant yes. One long drag across her palm meant, Get Elliot. A slow blink followed by a closed fist meant, Don't let them in. She never asked too many questions, just nodded like she'd already decided whose side she was on. That's the thing about people who've seen real pain. They stop looking for permission to do the right thing. Elliot came every other day, always during the lunch shift when the floor was busy, when no one paid attention to the quiet woman in room 219. I never spoke, but I didn't have to. He laid out photos like puzzle pieces on the rolling tray beside my bed. One showed my daughter's car pulling into my driveway the night before the crash, time-stamped at 11:14 p.m. She told me she was out of town. Another showed my son inside the hospital lounge, logging into the visitor Wi-Fi while I was still unconscious, pulling up a document on his laptop titled Advanced Directive Template. He didn't even have the decency to hide it. Smart, Elliot said one day, tapping the folder where my new will was safely stored. Changing the beneficiaries. Was your best move. I filed a certified copy already. Even if they burn the original, it won't matter. I blinked twice. The thank you he'd learned to accept. Then came the next part. Harder, riskier. I need your signature, he said softly. Just one. We'll file for legal protection, under elder endangerment. If they try to access your assets again or attempt another accident, it becomes a felony, not just suspicion. Clara waited until night shift when the corridor lights were dim and no one was checking vitals. She wheeled in a clipboard, a single sheet clipped tight at the top. My hand shook so badly it barely looked like a name, but it was enough to start a paper trail, enough to say, I see you. I'm not as helpless as you think. The next morning, my son showed up. He wore a black polo and a performance of concern. In his hands was a small bouquet of daisies, the kind they sell at gas stations. Hey, Ma, he said, like he hadn't called me a liability 2 weeks earlier. Looking good. Got you some flowers. Thought they'd cheer up the place. I didn't move. I didn't smile. He sat down anyway, started talking about real estate values, saying maybe it was time to start thinking seriously about options. I counted the freckles on his arm just to keep from screaming. He glanced towards the monitors and lowered his voice. Me and Aaron were talking. We'd take good care of the house. You know, you don't have to worry about the taxes or maintenance anymore. That was what he came for. Not to see me, not to ask if I could walk again, not to say, I'm glad you survived. Just to measure the walls he already thought were his. He didn't notice Clara step in behind him, didn't see her subtly unplug the audio recorder from under the bed once he left. You did great, she whispered, slipping it into her pocket. He just gave us everything we need. And for the first time since I opened my eyes in that room, I let myself imagine a life past this bed. A life not wrapped in machines and silence, not hunted, not owned, not waiting to be erased by the people I once fed with my hands. They thought I was asleep. They thought I was finished, but I was only beginning. They came dressed in black. He wore a charcoal suit he probably hadn't dry cleaned since their father's funeral. She had on a blouse that looked expensive but wrinkled, like she hadn't planned to care too much. I'm sure they thought the smudged mascara would sell it. The grief act. But they were late. 4 days too late. They walked into the hospital lobby like they already owned the place. Not a question between them, just assumptions that the paperwork would be waiting. The nurse would hand over a folder, and all they'd have to do was sign on dotted lines with freshly feigned sorrow. They didn't know I'd walked out the night before. Not under my own power. Not yet, but in a wheelchair covered in a navy quilt Grace had sewn herself. Clara wheeled me to the private car Elliot arranged, one signature and a forged discharge from an outside physician. A quiet exit like a woman slipping out of her own funeral, because that's what it was. They came to mourn a woman they believed was gone, but they weren't grieving. They were salivating. A young receptionist in blue scrubs met them at the desk. "Room 219, my daughter asked, voice soft, almost sweet. "We're here to collect her things and speak to someone about next steps." The girl typed something into the computer, her brow furrowed. "Room 219 was discharged last night, already taken care of." "Taken care of?" my son repeated, his voice cracked right where guilt should have lived. "By who?" She didn't say. All arrangements were made in advance. Her lawyer sent everything. My daughter blinked. "Lawyer?" The receptionist nodded. "Russell Kim, he left this envelope for you." That's when their smiles cracked. She handed over a flat manila envelope. No return address, no warmth. Just wait. They opened it right there in the corridor, their fingers greedy even as their faces tried to stay composed. Inside was a letter. "My letter. You always assumed I wouldn't outlast your patience. You were wrong. You always assumed silence meant permission. It didn't. I know everything. And I left you nothing. No signature, no affection. Just one final line underlined once in blue ink. I may have raised you, but I no longer claim you." Witnesses say she dropped the letter. He bent to pick it up, but not before everyone saw it. Not before a passing nurse paused, then looked away quickly. The kind of look reserved for someone watching a tower collapse in slow motion. They didn't. Leave immediately. They argued in the hallway, hushed at first, then louder, accusing each other of being sloppy, of talking too much, of not checking the damn brakes properly. The same brakes they swore were just bad luck, the same accident. They thought no one would survive, let alone question. But I was watching. From Grace's attic window, 2 houses down and 3 feet higher, propped up by pillows, sipping tea from a travel mug, every word floating up through the cracked vent she'd left open for me to hear. She sat beside me, knitting slowly. "You sure you want to stay for this part?" she asked. I didn't answer because I needed to see it. Needed to see the moment it dawned on them. They hadn't just lost the house. They'd lost me. Not the woman in the bed, the one with the pen. The one who left before they even thought to say goodbye. They pulled up to the house like they still owned it. Her Lexus parked crooked in the driveway, his truck idling behind like they were afraid someone might take their spot if they didn't hurry. The engine barely stopped before they jumped out. He went straight for the front door, jiggling the knob like it might suddenly remember him. It didn't. Deadbolt reinforced. The porch had changed too. New lockbox. Brass plaque bolted beside the doorbell that read, "This property is under legal review. Access restricted. For all inquiries, contact Kim and Associates." He stared at it like it had personally betrayed him. She walked around to the back, calling his name like it was a fire drill. "It's locked. Everything's locked." Of course it was. I made sure of that. Russell's firm had dispatched a property manager that morning. He met them in the driveway, pressed suit, clipboard in hand, didn't smile. "I'm here on behalf of Miss Albright," he said. They blinked. "She's alive?" my daughter asked, like I was a ghost that had ruined her weekend. "Very much," he replied, flipping the page. "And quite lucid. Would you like me to read her message aloud?" They didn't respond, so he did. "Effective immediately, this property is no longer within your legal access or interest. Do not attempt entry. Any trespassing will be reported. A copy of the new deed has been mailed to your last known address. You are not listed as heirs. Do not return." He handed them a sealed envelope. Same cream paper, same blunt weight. My son took it like a man accepting a parking ticket he didn't believe he deserved. My daughter didn't touch it, just stood there, arms crossed, chewing the inside of her cheek like it might stop the shame from leaking out. Then the manager nodded, got into his car, and left them standing there. Two adult children dressed in funeral black with nowhere to go and nothing to claim. They sat in the driveway for almost an hour, arguing at first, then silent. At some point, she opened the envelope. I watched from the attic window again, one room down across the fence line, Grace by my side with a mug of cocoa and knitted judgment in her lap. My daughter read the letter 3 times. Her mouth moved with the words. Then she threw it, not just tossed, threw, like the paper had burned her hand. I knew which part got her. You never once called me Mom when no one was watching. My son didn't speak. He just pulled out his phone, turned away, and made a call. He paced back and forth in front of the garden beds I once planted by hand. The roses looked better than they had in years. Grace smiled, watching them from the vent like it was a stage play. You really think they thought you'd just be waiting? I think, I whispered. They thought I'd pass away the same way I lived with them. Quietly, but quiet doesn't mean weak. And now the silence was mine. Mine. Inside the house, everything was untouched. But nothing belonged to them anymore. Not the couch they fought over when they were 12. Not the photo albums in the hall closet. Not even the fridge magnets they once bought me for Mother's Day. They'd come home to take something. Instead, they found something had been taken from them. Entitlement, access, assumption. And for the first time, they stood in front of my home as strangers, locked out, exactly where they left me. The argument started. In whispers. I could barely hear them from Grace's attic at first, just the rise and fall of syllables slipping into sharper edges. But then he slammed the car door, and that was the end of pretending. You said she wouldn't change it, he snapped. She wouldn't have if you hadn't been so obvious, she fired back, pacing near the mailbox like it owed her something. Do you think she didn't hear you in the hospital? You're the one who said we should hurry things along. I never said sabotage the car, you idiot. So that was it. The mask was off. And it wasn't guilt that had them unraveling. It was fear. He backed away from her, breathing hard, running a hand through his hair like maybe panic would untangle into logic if he just paced fast enough. You're the one who kept pushing to check the mail every week, he hissed. You practically lived at her fence line, and you're the one who brought up power of attorney at her birthday dinner. Jesus, Nathan, could you have been less subtle? Grace raised her eyebrows beside me. So, he's the type who ruins birthdays and breaks. I didn't laugh, but my hands clenched around the mug. Below us, they kept spiraling. She was supposed to leave us the house, he said, voice cracking, pacing now. She raised us. No, my daughter said, cold and flat. She raised you. I always knew she wasn't really our mother. That stopped him. He looked at her like he didn't recognize her, or maybe like he finally did. And yet here you are, just as broke and pissed off as I am. Don't you dare, she snapped. He pointed at the letter still crumpled in her hand. You told me she'd never change it. You said she was too sentimental, that she still saw us as her babies. Well, she muttered, looking away. I guess she finally saw us for what we are. That silence was colder than anything I'd heard yet. No tears, no apologies, just the weight of two people who built their futures on someone else's grave and had the nerve to act surprised when the ground gave out beneath them. He got in his truck first, drove off fast, tires skidding against the curb like he thought speed might outrun the consequences. She stayed a little longer, pacing, digging through her purse like a checkbook might suddenly materialize a second chance. Then she sat down on the steps, my steps, and lit a cigarette she wasn't supposed to have. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stared at the door, and for the first time I saw it on her face. Loss. Not just of the house or the money, but of the story she told herself that no matter how far she strayed, she could always come back and I'd be there waiting. Still mom. Still hers. That story was gone now. She left the cigarette on the step and walked away. I watched until her figure disappeared around the hedges I once planted with their father. Back when we believed family was something that could be grown with enough sun and patience, Grace turned to me after a long moment. You ready for what comes next? I sipped my tea. They started this. I'm just finishing it. Because they still didn't know what I knew. I had proof, witnesses, and a PI who didn't sleep. They weren't just losing me. They were about to lose everything they'd built on my silence. Russell didn't ask questions when I showed up. At his office with Elliot, and a folder that made even him blink. It was early, just past 8, and the receptionist wasn't even at her desk yet. We sat in a glass-walled conference room overlooking the city. All that sky and glass reflecting back. A version of myself I hadn't seen in years. Calm, straight-backed, not shaking anymore. I'll need to verify every piece, Russell said, spreading the contents across the table like evidence in a trial. But from what I'm seeing, this isn't just endangerment, it's conspiracy. Elliot nodded once. I've got timestamps. The hospital cam footage lines up with the car shop's inspection. There's no ambiguity. I leaned forward. What happens now? Russell folded his hands. Lawyer. Serious. First, we file a protective order. Immediate. If they so much as step foot near the property again, they're in violation. Second, we hand this off to the state attorney. Third, if you want it public, we can go to the press. I didn't speak for a long moment because it wasn't about headlines. It was about consequences, something they'd never had to taste before. Not when they lied, not when they manipulated, not when they slowly turned. The woman who raised them into a glorified ATM with a heart. They don't get to bury me alive, I said quietly. And they don't get to walk away like it never happened. Russell's eyes flicked over the brake line photo. A clean slice, undeniable. No, they don't. He slid over a final page, the one I'd asked him to draw up weeks ago. A letter addressed to the district attorney, signed, notarized, sealed. I read it again before I picked up the pen. I, Margaret Albright, hereby submit formal testimony and accompanying evidence to support charges of attempted vehicular life-threatening act, financial fraud, and elder endangerment against Nathan Albright and Aaron Graves. My hand didn't shake when I signed it. Russell nodded, folding it carefully into a black envelope. We'll deliver this by courier within the hour. Elliot pulled out one last item from his bag, a USB drive. Security cam footage, the whole conversation, they had on the porch. They didn't know the house next door was still wired. That was Grace's doing. She'd installed the cameras back when her brother's son got arrested for breaking into her shed. Said she never took them down because people get bold when they think no one's watching. Now, it would be the nail in their coffin, not mine. I left Russell's office with copies of everything. Not because I planned to use them again, but because I had learned this the hard way. Silence is an instrument if it's backed by proof. And I had all of it. That afternoon, I sat in a borrowed cottage 3 hours away, tucked against a hillside where the air smelled like pine and freedom. No neighbors, no children, no noise, just me. A lawyer on standby, a PI on retainer, and a future with no more keys handed to ungrateful hands. When the letters arrived at their doors, one for each of them, I didn't have to be there to watch. The reactions. Elliot said my son turned pale before even opening it. My daughter tried to call me twice that night. I didn't answer. I was too busy recording a video, my face clear and steady in the camera. My name is Margaret Albright. If you're watching this, it means the last lie has fallen. Then I reached for the flash drive and pressed upload because I wasn't hiding anymore. I left behind one teacup, 2 framed photos, and an old cardigan that still smelled faintly of rosemary. Everything else I took with me, or burned in my name. Disappearing. Isn't what people think it is. It's not hopping a train with a scarf over your head like some movie fugitive. It's paperwork, stamps, 3 notarized copies of 1 cold decision. I'm done. Russell handled the logistics. He filed the legal name change under a protective clause for victims of attempted familial harm. It wasn't easy, but the evidence became public record, No judge blinked. New ID, new license, new address sealed. Elliot took care of the transfer. Quiet sale of the house to a trust. The trust handed it to the new owner for exactly $1. April. The goddaughter they laughed at. The one they said was just a phase when I took her in for 6 months after her mom passed. The one who used to write me letters even after she got married. The one who called me Mama Mar long after my own children stopped saying anything at all, and she cried when she got the call. Not because of the house. She would have lived in a tent if it meant helping, but because I trusted her with it. I'll take care of it, she said through the phone, voice breaking. I'll make it mean something. You already do, I whispered. Then I hung up. Because goodbyes are for people who might come back. I had no intention. I took the train at dawn, a slow one. No ID required, just a ticket in cash and a window seat with sunlight filtering in like quiet forgiveness. No one looked at me twice, which was the point. Somewhere past the 4th station, I turned my phone off and dropped it into the river when we crossed the bridge. One final ripple, no signal, no trace. Gone. By noon, I arrived at the edge of a town no one talks about. A small cluster of homes wrapped in forest, built for women like me. Not victims, not escapees, survivors. It's not a shelter, it's a sanctuary. They call it Second Bloom. There's a sign at the gate, hand-painted, wooden, cracked a little from weather. It says, "You are not what they did." I stood there for a while, then I stepped through. Inside, I met Rosa, 63. Used to be a school. Principal before her son forged her signature on 5 refinance loans. Margaret, not me. Another one, 74, walked out of her own home with a purse full of receipts and not a single apology from the husband she buried alone. We don't tell stories right away. We sit in gardens, we plant tomatoes, we write things down we may never send. And we heal slowly with our own names. The day after I arrived, the letters went out to the state, to the press, to every contact I had left in Richard's old address book. The ones who still believed the kids were saints. The ones who asked me at funerals why they hadn't called more. They know now. I know now. Elliot confirmed both were served. He sent me one final photo. My daughter being led from her office in handcuffs, head down. My son the same afternoon, taken from his condo by 2 plainclothes officers. They tried to blame each other. Of course they did. But the recordings, the break line photos, the emails, my signature, all of it saying the same thing. Fatal intent, and now they're the ones being erased. Elliot said the police didn't even knock at first. They waited. Surveillance teams watched my son's condo for 3 days, making sure he didn't pack a bag or disappear into one of those sleazy Vegas properties he'd been sniffing around for real estate opportunities. But Nathan never noticed. He was too busy calling his sister, leaving voicemails he probably thought wouldn't be saved. Don't say anything. They don't have proof. We'll tell them she was confused, that she'd been sick. Too late. Sweetheart. The knock came at 6:12 a.m. on a Wednesday, a quiet hour before the world starts performing. Before you have time to lie, 2 detectives, 2 badges, 1 warrant. He opened the door shirtless, blinking like the law had never applied to him before. They read him his rights as he reached for his phone. He didn't argue. Not at first. Just kept saying, "Wait, what?" Like disbelief could undo brake wires and digital signatures. My daughter's arrest came 3 hours later. At her office, she was wearing heels and a smile when they arrived. She tried to step into a meeting room. They stepped in after her. Her assistant, a 20-year-old intern named Mia, called Elliot the next day to say, she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just said, "This can't be happening." But it was happening to both of them. For once, the consequences were real. No more silence to soak their cruelty. No more mother to cover their sins. No more home to hide inside like children pretending not to hear the truth knocking. Elliot sent me the arrest videos, not because I asked for them, but because he thought I deserved to see it. The moment power left their bodies. In both clips, I saw something familiar, a flicker in the eyes, not guilt, disbelief. They truly never thought I'd fight back. They thought I'd pass away, clinging to their photos, whispering, "But I raised you." And while they carved up the life I built like vultures at a dinner table. But I didn't pass away. I documented. I prepared. I waited. And now it was them standing under the sterile light of judgment. The headlines hit within 24 hours. Siblings arrested in alleged attempt of stepmother wrestle over estate. Brake line sabotage. Police release audio and email evidence in shocking family betrayal. The story went viral. Not because I was famous, but because the world understands something about quiet women who survive that were rarely believed until the wreckage becomes undeniable. My inbox at the sanctuary filled with messages. Other women, other not real moms, other nearly forgotten names on leases and documents and wills. One woman wrote, "They used me like a shelf, like I was just a thing that held them until they didn't need me anymore. Thank you for showing. Me that love without respect is just manipulation in costume," I wrote back. "Being alone is better than being used." That same day, Grace called me. Her voice sounded younger somehow. "They came by," she said. Reporters sat on the curb like stray dogs sniffing for another quote. I told them the truth. "What did you say?" She chuckled. "I said she was quiet, not stupid. You just never saw how sharp a woman gets when she's been cut one too many times." I didn't cry. Not because I didn't feel, but because the tears had already been shed, dried, recycled into ink on affidavits and signatures on justice. They'd been arrested, charged, and exposed. The press conference wasn't my idea. It was April's. She called me 3 days after the story broke, her voice strong, but shaking a little at the edges, like she knew what she had to do and wasn't sure the world would listen. "They're painting you like a sad old woman," she said. "One headline called you a tragic recluse taken advantage of by ungrateful stepchildren. They're missing the point." I didn't answer right away because I'd lived my whole life trying not to be a tragedy. I'd fed children who weren't mine, paid bills no one thanked me for, stayed quiet through insults that dressed themselves in politeness. I had been many things, but I'd never been sad. Tired, yes. Used, without question. But not sad. April took a breath and said, "Let me speak. Let me tell them what you really did." And I told her the truth. "If you do, don't defend me. Defend the women who can't speak yet," she promised. The press conference was held in the garden. My garden. The one they never watered. The one they complained about constantly. The one I planted anyway, season after season, because beauty should not require permission to exist. April stood there in a navy dress and soft flats, no makeup, but dignity in full display. Behind her stood a poster board with an architectural sketch of the house, newly labeled the Albright House for Women Rebuilding After Familial Betrayal. The reporters bent closer. A woman in the rear gripped her notebook as if it were about to blow up. April displayed the final draft of my will, which was sealed in a transparent folder and laminated. 6 weeks before to the tragedy, this was signed. It specifies that this house be turned into a transitional refuge for women over 50 who have endured financial or emotional betrayal by immediate family members, and it identifies me as the only beneficiary. A reporter yelled, "Was this revenge?" April remained unflinching. "This was reclamation," I said. The flashbulbs clicked. "This is referred to as a family tragedy by the media. It wasn't like that. It has nothing to do with inheritance. It had to do with entitlement. Because a lady had once prepared their lunches, 2 people thought they could take advantage of her affection." She hesitated. She reared them. She dressed them. To spare them the burden of her sacrifice, she wept in private. And they attempted to obliterate her for asking for peace at last. Quiet. The wind even ceased. She took a step toward the microphone. "Those who view love as a transaction will never own this mansion. It now belongs to women who gave their all and were met with silence, skepticism, or worse, and who were told they didn't count because their name wasn't on a birth certificate." A murmur swept over the audience. "There will be 10 beds, a garden, a legal aid office, and dignity at this location. Because too many women have been duped into thinking they were fortunate to be tolerated, and love without respect isn't love at all." The left applauded first, followed by the middle, and finally everyone else. Real, but not thundering. She took a step back, and I briefly stopped breathing. I saw her raise her head and grin the same way I used to from a quiet library 3 towns away on a borrowed laptop. Stable, yet neither broad nor ostentatious, like a lady who is aware of her origins and her purpose. They never had my house. A seed was always involved. It was flowering now. The punishment had already begun, even though the trial had not yet commenced. First, their partners departed. 2 days after the arrest, Jenna, Nathan's girlfriend, the one who used to call me Mama Mags while browsing through Instagram at my dinner parties, packed her things. She just changed her phone number and texted Elliot's contact once without even leaving a message. Tell the first to Margaret. Have faith in her. When the news broke, Aaron's spouse immediately locked the joint accounts, didn't attempt to argue at all. He worked as a banker. When he observed a sinking account, he recognized it. The people moved quickly, but the courts took their time. Customers left. Friends fell quiet. The neighbors who had previously waved ceased doing so. They were no longer just charged, they were well known. They vanished from every group conversation they were a part of. All one-night invitations are canceled. Nobody wanted to be seen supporting the children who used inherited dishes and hardwood floors to plot a deadly scheme against their mother figure. It's amusing. When the repercussions hit, the first individuals to disappear were the ones who had pleaded with me to be patient with them. Nathan attempted to publish something ambiguous online. Doing business with family is challenging. The remarks were unrelenting, but you don't know the complete story. Nathan, you cut her brakes. Tell us what we don't understand. You should apologize to all the women you have ever smiled at. In a matter of hours, he terminated his account. Erin as well. She tried the sympathy way, doing a single interview with a tabloid website and saying, "I don't know how everything got so twisted," in a tearful video with filtered lighting. I cherished her. To me, she resembled a mother. The letter I sent, that concluded, "You never once called me mom when no one else was listening," was the one that was shown in the film. That line stuck in people's minds. It became stuck. It hurt. And when former coworkers began to expose emails, her crocodile tears stopped. The ones when she dubbed me the maid who thinks she's a matriarch and made fun of me. It turns out that when the incorrect lady finally speaks up, people listen. The world enjoys punishing traitors, especially those who appear to be in good standing until their corruption becomes apparent. Grace called once again, her voice piercing with delight. Yesterday I saw her, Erin, in the drugstore. She appeared slimmer, hollow. I answered, "Guilt will do that?" "No," Grace answered, "it's emptiness, not guilt." Not guilt. As they lost more than simply the house. They no longer saw me as I was. The obedient one. The one who tidied up after them and grinned through taunts, as if she were grateful to be anywhere near them. That version fell apart without me to support it. They noticed that no one was viewing them as victims. No more. And here's the problem with traitors. After the smoke clears, they believe they can rebuild. But a person who turns on blood is not trusted. Even though it was mine, even if it wasn't their blood. They are currently awaiting arraignment in different jails. Public defenders are their attorneys. They are mocked for asking for mercy. And I'm drinking tea with Rosa on a veranda 3 towns over, as the sun slowly and gently apologizes across the hills. We no longer discuss them because they are unimportant, not because we are afraid. Once, I adored them. They are now only names on a docket. And they will never outrun me as the headline.